What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Combat Sports Central. This is CSC Plus episode number 4. I am not going to go over much from last week because we have a UFC event this weekend. We have the Bobby Green versus KGD Dawson, Grant Dawson, main eventing a fight night. You get some heavy hitters in the co-main event. So today's episode is basically going to be talking about all of those fights, taking a look at the matchups, taking a look at the odds for these matchups, start from the bottom and work our way up. I've had time to look at each and every one of these fights. I'm not going to make any picks yet. There will be another picks podcast that will again include against the spread for the NFL. We'll have the boys back on. We'll pick the NFL slate, but we're also going to pick the UFC slate. We're also going to give you guys our UFC bets on that CSC Plus episode number 5, so you can expect that again Saturday morning. It's recorded Friday at night. It's released to you guys Saturday morning. But for this one, we're just going to go ahead and take a look at the UFC matchups, and maybe towards the end of the video, we can look at the NFL Week 5 slate. But again, that will be less of a priority compared to the Combat Sport Week and the UFC event that we do get on Saturday night. So without further ado, let us get into the early prelims. We're going to start at the very bottom of the card. We're going to work our way up to the main event. And arguably the co-main event is the biggest fight on this card for me, but we will get there. So let us start from the bottom. A women's matchup. JJ Aldrich takes on Montana De La Rosa. There's no significant height or reach advantage in the fight. De La Rosa, Ultimate Fighter Season 26 alumni, has had an odd string of performances in her recent fights. She's beat the likes of Lipsky back in 2021, but has been inconsistent with back-to-back losses and 4 losses in her last 6 fights. Aldrich actually lost to Lipsky as a 3-1 favorite and has also had some weird performances, no doubt. But she has been a little more successful in her recent fights, with this fight being a near pick'em and the inconsistencies with women's mixed martial arts. I am not confident enough to make a pick this early, especially when we only have fight lines and over-under rounds out right now. So we're going to stay away from this one. It's difficult for me to make a pick a side. I'm going to leave this one be, and we're going to go ahead and move on. We move on to Nate Maness versus Mateus Mendonça. Maness has become a crowd favorite in the UFC. He's had a couple of performances of the nights, 2020 and 2021, and since then, he's been put up against some of the toughest competition that the UFC has to offer, especially when it comes to prospects in the division. He took on a killer like Umar Nurmagomedov, who's top 15, and then he took on Tagir Ulanbekov. I apologize if I butcher any names, but 2 real serious guys. Maness will have a significant height advantage in this contest of 5'10 versus Mateus is 5'6, but the reaches are actually near identical because Mateus has very long arms for his height. Mendonça, a teammate of Charles Oliveira at Shootbox in Brazil. He's obviously the background from Brazil. Charles Oliveira, you think to jiu-jitsu, great grappler, which he is. But this guy comes in as a powerful striker. As we've seen in some of his UFC performances, he's entered into the Contender Series at 8-0. He knocked out an opponent on the show as a 2-1 favorite. And against Javid Basharat, the striking looked even. Mateus looked very explosive, but he can be hit. And he was hit by Basharat. Basharat, another great up-and-coming contender. But the story of the fight, Basharat keeping a consistent gas tank, where Mateus kind of fell off a little bit. And after the first, Basharat controlled the rest of the fight and won via unanimous decision. This one, again, is a tough fight. Very wide odds here. Nate Maness coming in at plus 205 versus Mateus at minus 250. Not seeing, again, much I love in this one. Then we move on to another women's fight, Vanessa Demopoulos versus Kanako Murata. This has seen the most movement from a fight line so far. Kanako Murata opened between minus 218 and minus 240 and has climbed all the way to minus 355 and as high as minus 385 on some sports books. Kanako is 12-2 and a younger fighter at only 30 years old, whereas Vanessa, on the other hand, is 35 years old with a less than impressive record in UFC terms at 9-5. Vanessa is 3-2, however, in the UFC to Murata's 1-1. Kanako is clearly a wrestler from her UFC fights and her past fights in Invicta. Training all her life, she has a line of wrestlers that she looked up to. So the game plan here is clear. Going to try and take Vanessa down probably and control her and look to dominate. In her wins, she was successful on 44% of her takedown attempts against Ronda Marcos and more significantly stacked up more than 9 minutes of control time. Literally 2 minutes more than half of the entire fight she spent in control against Ronda. So we have seen in her past fights that the wrestling is there. She does have good control. And in her loss, the gap of striking was significant. Jandiroba had her way with her and until she pulled guard. Once that happened, it was back and forth on the ground with ground and pound from Murata until Jandiroba, who was active with submissions, locked in an armbar and snapped Murata's arm. Kanako actually went on to continue the fight in the second round for the entirety of the round, but the fight was ultimately called at the end of the second round due to the broken arm. Murata's hope in most of her fights is to clinch and avoid striking. She has good clinch knees. She has great clinch takedowns, which we've seen in her fights. And she fought with a full round with a broken arm, so she's very, very tough, gutsy showing there. And we'll see how that arm impacted her training with that arm, bringing that up. She has been off of fighting for 2 years, so coming in with that big of a layoff, we're going to get to see how she performs. Again, heavy favorite going into this contest. Vanessa, a tougher fighter. Her striking isn't on the level of Jandiroba by any means, but I think the stand-up will be basically even in this contest. Neither show a significant edge against any of their opponents in any of their fights. So very even striking, but Kanako has the wrestling. But we don't want to forget champion in jiu-jitsu, a brown belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. This fight might actually stay on the feet, in my opinion, as I think both girls won't mind the other striking. They'll feel safe on the feet. So we could get a very, very boring unanimous decision one way or the other, depending on who's more active, which I would assume would be Murata. But if this fight does go to the mats, to be honest, I will be taking a look at the Vanessa submission line. I know that Murata, a huge favorite here, but if we compare the big underdog in Vanessa with her submission line and get huge odds, I am going to be very, very pinpointed on those odds once they come out. The next fight is in the UFC Bantamweight division, and is a pretty good matchup against a more efficient and effective basic boxer versus a great counter striker. Johnny Munoz Jr. will take on Aoriqileng in the next fight. Johnny Munoz is accredited in jiu-jitsu and a longtime MMA competitor. His boxing is, again, basic, but very, very effective. He works off the jab. He works very long against opponents, usually outstriking anyone they put him in there against. But Aoriqileng is going to pose some risks in this fight. Without a doubt in my mind, Aori, a very, very good counter striker, also a very good defensive grappler. If Munoz is able to get Aoriqileng down to the mats, if there is a risky position for Munoz where he might want to slow the pace, Aoriqileng does a very, very good job getting back to his feet and working from bottom against the fence. I'm very, very excited to see how Aori keeps his feints going and how Munoz will react to those. I think Aori will have spots in this fight where he's able to counter strike, and Aori, in my opinion, hits a lot harder, so he might be able to land a knockdown, a knockout, or win a unanimous decision by looking more dominant on the feet. But again, Munoz, if he's able to get Aori in his guard, I think that Munoz might do a very, very good job searching for submissions, and if he can hold him down, which is, again, a very, very difficult time for anybody that really fights Aoriqileng, but if he is able to hold him down, he can work his top game Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and might be able to find a submission here. But again, he's going to have to be willing to take risks in that spot, open up spots for Aori to get back to his feet, get back to the counter striking. This is a very, very good one. I'm going to probably lean Aoriqileng. The odds are very, very tight on this fight, around minus 115 for the Aori side and around minus 105 for Munoz Jr. So I'm excited to see where this matchup leads and who's going to take the victory. We can move on, though, to the strawweight women's division. We're getting to see a veteran kind of versus the newbie, Karolina Kowalkiewicz, who seems like she's been in the UFC forever. At 37 years old, will take on Diana Belbiţă, who is at 27 years old. They're giving the odds to the veteran here, Karolina, coming in around minus 178, but has come down a little bit to around minus 155. Diana, on the other hand, has moved up from plus 130 to plus 120 to around plus 130, plus 138 on some good sports books here. In my opinion, I think that is how this fight should be shifting. I think Diana should honestly be basically a pick'em in this fight. It's difficult for me to see where Karolina has an advantage. We take a look at it by the numbers. Diana Belbiţă, 5'7", with a 68-inch reach, 4-inch advantage in height and reach to Karolina's 5'3", 64-inch reach. Regarding significant strikes, Karolina is connecting on 5.65 significant strikes per minute to Diana's 6.59 significant strikes per minute. Kowalkiewicz connects on 42% of her strikes she attempts, while Belbiţă on 44%, a little bit of an advantage there for Belbiţă. Then you get to the grappling, in my opinion. Karolina is nowhere near as an effective grappler as Diana is, landing 0.3 takedowns per 3 rounds, whereas Belbiţă gets her opponent to the mat on 50% of her takedown attempts, and Kowalkiewicz is less likely to go for a submission. Belbiţă at 0.6 sub attempts per 15 minutes to Karolina's 0.2. I think a lot of the numbers here favor Diana Belbiţă, and at plus money, I think she probably is the play here. Younger, more hungry to Karolina, who's probably going to be out the door very, very soon. But again, a legend of the sport, more MMA experience in my opinion, even though the records are identical, but more experience in the tougher fights. And you'll see some people picking Karolina, there's no doubt, but in my opinion, I'm going to take Diana in this one. Then we can go on to Philipe Lins versus Ion Cutelaba, the crazy man Ion Cutelaba. What a battle this one is. They both hit the scales, 205 light heavyweight division. We get to see a little bit of an advantage when it comes to Philipe Lins' height and reach. Height 6'2 to 6'1 in Lins' favor. 78-inch reach for Lins to 75-inch for Cutelaba. The story of Lins, he comes out as two different fighters. Sometimes he comes out dominant, looking for action, trying to finish fights, and sometimes he doesn't come out looking very well. We got a good records here. Lins is 17-5, Cutelaba 17-9. Both guys finishers. Felipe Lins grabbing 9 TKO KO wins, 4 submissions to only 4 decisions. Cutelaba 13 wins by knockout, 2 wins by submission, only 2 wins by decision. So you can definitely see how both of these guys are going to want to get the finish. I would probably take, again, the underdog here. It's a very, very close fight. But if Lins is able to come out and fight on his positive side, then you're getting good plus money on a guy that could very well win this fight. A good one, in my opinion. I'm very, very excited to see who's going to come out on top of this. And I'm just excited to watch this fight because there's going to be a lot of good contact, a lot of good striking in this one. And then Algeo, Alexander Hernandez, Alexander the Great Hernandez. Hernandez seems, in my opinion, to slow later on in fights. Hernandez looks to add a win to his 14-6 record. He's 31 years old and stands in at 5'9", where Algeo comes in at 6 feet tall. 17-7 with a 73-inch reach. So reach is very nearly identical, but Algeo gets a couple inches in height. The grappling category, Alexander Hernandez, 1.38 takedowns per 15 minutes to Algeo, 0.87 takedowns. I'm going to be interested to see if Hernandez tries to implement takedowns because we have seen in Hernandez's fights, he does start to slow. He's a very short, stocky, strong guy. Algeo is more throws a lot of volume at his opponents. So it's going to be an interesting fight, in my opinion. I will probably lean the Algeo side, but I could see Hernandez, if he does decide to go for some takedowns, control some time here, and try and push his way first 2 rounds, take up and push this way to a decision win. I could see that as potential fight win method 2. Next up is a battle of 2 highlight stuffers. Drew Dober, with 21 fights of UFC in-cage experience, is another very, very exciting fighter. Again, well, from the Algeo fight to the co-main event, these fights are absolutely stacked, especially Drew Dober being an unranked lightweight. Dober has also been a guy with mixed results in his career. His huge power and relatively strong chin lead him into brawls, and this fight is going to be no different. You got to make stylistic matchups that equal fireworks. And Aoriqileng was just the guy to bring out the best in Dober, and Dober is just the guy to bring out the best in Aoriqileng. Like Dober, Aoriqileng, hyper aggressive. Glenn will be the taller fighter and is similar to Dober in his style. He likes to throw hooks in the pocket and again relies on a chin that has very, very rarely faulted him. He's only been finished once. A very wild fact about this fight is both guys were finished in their most recent fight, and both guys are actually approaching 35 years of age. They're approaching that kind of downturn in their careers, especially chins start to wear for guys that are this exciting. But 91% of the bets come in on Drew Dober. That's pushed him from minus 350 to minus 468, making his price super steep. Shows little value to me anymore. And I wouldn't fault anyone for taking a shot at Aoriqileng on this fight at his new number of plus 350. I think the underdog play is probably the way you want to go here. And maybe even siding with an over. You want to go against what everybody thinks is going to happen is this fight's going to be quick. Somebody's going to get knocked out. But maybe one of their chins holds up long enough to push this round into a second. Push this over a 1.5. It's unlikely because both guys are so exciting. Both guys really have nothing to lose in terms of being knocked out. They're both highlight reel guys. They both come for finishes. They both test their chins, so it might stay under, but if I was going to play, maybe I'd probably go on the side of an over. That's just my opinion on this one. We can move on to the next fight, which is another, again, great solid fight to feature on the main card. Joaquin Buckley takes on Alex Morono. The kick heard around the world. Joaquin Buckley returns again to the cage. 18-fight veteran Alex Morono will meet him in the octagon. Morono coming in slight underdog, minus 150. Buckley, minus 175. According to DraftKings, the bets placed are nearly identical, but Buckley gets the edge in total bets at around 55%. Earlier in the week, you could get Buckley as high as minus 191, Morono as high as 170 plus 160. But even with his edge in total bets, still to this point, the line has actually come down and it's flipped. He's going the opposite way, opening at minus 175. He's now down to minus 170, and with more bets coming on it, you can see that sharp money is actually on the Morono side, and maybe a little bit of the out-of-cage notoriety UFC is getting more fans to place bets on Buckley. Morono resurging a little bit, 5-1 in his last 6 fights. Gracie Barra and Fortis MMA has made Morono a very, very well-rounded, both on the feet, on the mat. He also trends up later on in fights, which might benefit him in this one. By no means an underdog for a reason here. He's not risk-free. He was cracked and finished by Santiago Ponzinibbio, who's kind of come out to show off that he's a little bit lesser of a striker than we might have thought when he was coming up. And the strength of schedule for Morono, in my opinion, hasn't been quite to the level of Joaquin Buckley. I think the value is on the Morono side, but it's a very close fight. I think it could go either way, and it's tough for me to place money. Maybe a small bet on Morono. The value, in my opinion, again, there, but I'll probably lay off this one. Then we get the co-main event, which in my opinion has the potential to pull the entire card. Joe Pyfer, a knockout artist, a serious knockout artist. Body Bags is getting a lot of love coming into the card, sitting as one of the biggest favorites on the card. 11 wins with 10 knockouts and heavy hands, have lasted in the UFC with 2 straight, including a first-round performance of the night win over Alan Amedovski. Out of Philadelphia, the athletes from there have been rolling out of the city in bunches. Pyfer has also competed in grappling at 205, and as you probably know with Alhassan, that's going to give him an edge in this contest. 2021 odds on Abdul Razak, on the other hand, flipped. He hadn't been a UFC underdog in his entire career through his first 7 fights, with an average fight line of a whopping average fight line in 7 fights of minus 251. He knocked out Sabah Hamasi in the first round twice, then knocked out Nico Price in brutal fashion. But it would take 3 straight losses that would make Alhassan not become a huge favorite again. As an underdog, Alhassan is 1-1. He's never faced a mismatch anywhere near this big according to the odds, with Pyfer getting minus 480. Alhassan boils down to a first-round fighter. If you're laying his money on him, he loops strikes, and if he lands a big shot, he will win the fight. Pyfer has been rocked in Cage Fury, so it's possible, but he gets tired. All fights that go past 6 minutes for Alhassan have seen Alhassan on the wrong side of the result. Alhassan also doesn't have great takedown defense, so Pyfer might want to exploit that in this fight. His losses: Amari Akhmadov, 6 conceded takedowns. Munir Lazez, 4 conceded takedowns. Jacob Malkoun, 8 conceded takedowns. Joaquin Buckley, a striker, also on the card, 5 conceded takedowns. So you can see that hole in Alhassan's game, especially towards the later halves of fights. If you're on Alhassan, you hope for that first round finish. He's done 10 times before first round, but Pyfer-wise, he's got the height advantage, the reach a little bit, plus his own power. He's got to stay safe 1 to 4 minutes into this fight. You can guarantee from the Philly team, comprised of great, well-rounded fighters and good wrestlers, they've set him up with a good game plan. Pyfer might take this fight to the ground, or if, God forbid, he might risk it, that gives Alhassan fighters a benefit of the doubt. But if I'm on the Alhassan side, I want to hope that Pyfer stays away from the clinch, stays away from the grappling, because Pyfer has grappled with big guys at 205, but I do see that being a part of his game, which might mean over 1.5 rounds might be a play. Alhassan is a tough guy. Alhassan is rarely finished, so I'm surprised that the over is getting little to no love in this fight. But again, you got guys that come in with so many finishes on their record. Alhassan with all these first-round finishes. Pyfer with a lot of first-round finishes. I understand it, face value, but I might see the lean over in this one. And finally, we move on to the main event of the evening. An interesting main event, not one that I think I'd ever see main event a fight night card. Dawson is on an 11-fight win streak, basically, fighting out of a top gym in Coconut Creek, Florida, and making his first run at a contendership in the UFC. Probably had his most impressive win in his last win against Amir Ismagulov. But on the other side, you have Bobby Green, 3-4 in his last 7 fights. Basically in this spot because he took out Tony Ferguson in his most recent fight. He's been in the UFC for over 10 years and a fringe top 15 through the entirety of that career. This feels like the UFC giving Bobby Green a little bit of a benefit of the doubt for being such a long-time UFC homer. So we get to see him in the main event. Dawson opened up as an extremely wide favorite, which is what I would expect, minus 380, and continues to move past the 400 mark, the minus 400 mark, to minus 407 on most books. Funny enough, the last time Dawson was this wide of a favorite, he actually drew against Ricky Glenn. Dawson is the elitist of control grapplers, which has seemed to be the best way for him to win fights in recent years of mixed martial arts. But his biggest downside showed in that Glenn fight, which I just mentioned where he drew, was his gas tank, where he started to slowly fade because he wrestles so much. If a fighter stays active on the ground and continues to try to get to his feet, where Dawson has to continue to take them down, this depletes his gas tank. This is Dawson's first 5x5 main event fight, so it's a prove-it spot here for Grant Dawson. I'll be interested to see how Bobby Green, after impressive wins in his last fight, how he'll try to stay active on the ground, how he'll try to continue to get up, if he'll have any success there. And maybe in round 4 and 5, this might get interesting. But to be fair, Dawson in his most recent fights looked to have fixed that gas tank issue. The Demirez Magulov fight, he was controlling him the entire time. Dawson is a dominant grappler. Bobby Green, on the other hand, impressive win again over Tony Ferguson in his recent fight. One thing that's got him probably in this main event slot. But prior, Drew Dober landed a brutal knockout on Bobby Green. Islam fight was on 10 days notice, so I'm going to scratch that one from the record. But if we go even further back, Thiago Moises was able to take Green down relatively easily. He landed at a 66% clip, but he only had 2 serious attempts, and he landed them both pretty easily, in my opinion. Bobby Green was able to get back to his feet, so I'll be interested to see if he can do that against Dawson. But Dawson, a much better wrestler, specifically a wrestler. Jiu-jitsu maybe not, but wrestler, better than Moises, in my opinion. So again, prove it fight for Dawson. I'm interested to see if Green might have more gas towards the later rounds. But again, your gas tank depletes just as much when you're facing off against a wrestler. This one's a tough spot for me to see Green at any value. We'll see the later numbers. Pick'em Friday will come out. I'm probably going to keep my hands off this one. It's kind of a garbage main event in my opinion as well. So we'll move on. So let's go ahead and we can skip on over to the NFL if you're still here with us. BetStamp, again, if you guys don't know, BetStamp gives you the best live odds. Thursday, we are all on the Commanders. We got them in at -5.5 on the last podcast. You can go watch our predictions there. So I'm going to skip right to Sunday. London game number 1 again. Jacksonville remains in London to take on the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo is getting big favorite line here, -5.5. Jacksonville, though, staying in London for one more week. I think that might play them an edge, so we'll see about my against the spread pick in this game. I'll probably end up leaning Jacksonville plus the 5.5. The Giants, one of the most sorry franchises in the NFL, if not the most sorry franchise in the NFL, is getting 10.5 points against the Miami Dolphins, and now you don't even think that's enough points, but we'll continue on. New Orleans is going to travel into New England, 2 struggling teams. I have a feeling the Patriots defense is going to make Derek Carr look really bad, and the New Orleans Saints defense is going to make Mac Jones look very, very bad. So this is going to be a very, very low-scoring game. 40.5 is the over-under. I'd probably go under that still, but that, again, very defensive game for 1 o'clock. Baltimore-Pittsburgh divisional matchup there again. These are usually tough, played very, very close. The Steelers looked pretty bad against Houston, but again, they're still a 2-2 NFL. They're still a 2-2 football team, so I do have faith in them playing well. We go on to Carolina, Detroit. Detroit -9.5. That's fair. In Detroit, Carolina has really, really been struggling. I do think 9.5 points is a very wide margin for a defense like Carolina, so we'll lean into that pick probably on Saturday. But continuing on, Houston travels to Atlanta. I'm surprised Atlanta is this short of a I'm surprised Atlanta is a favorite. I guess the home field is giving them a couple points. Stroud playing better than Ritter. Defense in Houston playing great under Demario Davis. Houston seems like a pick here for me. Tennessee, Indianapolis. Indianapolis -1. Tennessee -1.5 after slapping Cincinnati. Makes sense to me, kind of. Indianapolis had to come back, tie the game, went into overtime, still could not beat the Rams. So it's at home. Good matchup there. The Arizona Cardinals, an underdog to Cincinnati. They're still giving Joe Burrow time at -3, still making him a favorite. Joshua Dog was playing great against San Fran. Almost led them to cover the spread last week. They get 3.5 points here at home. Might be a play against a sorry quarterback, or a quarterback playing really sorry in Joe Burrow. We can go on now to Philadelphia, traveling to Los Angeles. Los Angeles has looked really good. The Eagles almost blew it to the Commanders. I'll be interested in this one. Cooper Kupp seems to be back at practice from what I'm hearing. That'll be an interesting game if Cooper Kupp plays. They got Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, Matthew Stafford looked good last week. Interesting game there. Vikings against the Chiefs. The Chiefs are always going to be favorited. Chiefs probably win. Do they cover 4.5? Couldn't cover. Even if you bet 4.5 against the Jets, they wouldn't have covered that. Vikings, great team, very high-powered offense. Defense on the Chiefs probably better than the Vikings, but Vikings offense overpowered when Kirk is playing well. When Kirk is playing poorly, they could actually impact the game very negatively. So we'll see where that one goes in Minnesota. The Jets travel to Denver. This is a good game for Zach Wilson if he can continue the way he's been playing last week into this week, beat Denver. Aaron Rodgers news. Optimism there for him to play this season. I highly, highly doubt it, but there is optimism, so the Jets might feed off that, play well in Denver, plus 2.5. You're taking. Do you think Zach Wilson's going to play as well as he did? And to be fair, the Denver run defense is brutal. I'll be looking at Breece Hall's line over in that game, but we'll see it later on. And then the primetime playoff game feel. The Dallas Cowboys travel into San Fran. San Fran knocking Dallas out back-to-back years. This is going to be a prove-it, a hard-nosed, heavy-hitting, great game here, in my opinion. 820, the San Fran minus 3.5, the favorite, Dallas, San Fran. This is going to be a wonderful game, a near pick'em for me, so what a matchup there. What a matchup for the Sunday night game. And Monday Night Football, we're taking a look at Green Bay traveling in to Las Vegas. Two teams really struggling. Green Bay getting blown out last Thursday against Detroit in Green Bay. The Raiders struggling, had to put in their backup quarterback who struggled against the Chargers, even though they were in position to win the game on the 1-yard line before their backup quarterback threw a pick. So it's going to be an interesting matchup. But that will do it for CSC Plus episode number 4. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked, remember to like that video and subscribe to Combat Sports Central. I will see you in the next one.